Topic 62, writing a thesis statement from a completed graphic organizer. By the end of this podcast, you should be able to write a thesis statement that responds to an essay question in one sentence and use the evidence that you collected in the graphic organizer to inform your thesis statement. In the previous two podcasts, we've learned about the importance of examining an essay question before beginning to write, about constructing a graphic organizer based on that question, and filling it in with evidence from notes taken during reading and listening. You may have noticed that the words essay question keep reappearing in each podcast, and with good reason. The essay question should guide each step of the pre-writing, writing, and editing processes. Nowhere is this more apparent than in writing a thesis statement, the topic of this podcast. Many students react to the word thesis statement as if they've just heard nails screeching down a blackboard. You don't need to have this reaction, though. First, a definition. What is a thesis statement exactly? A thesis statement is a specific, direct answer to the essay question asked in one sentence. Where do you get the ideas upon which your thesis statement should be based? From reading over and considering the evidence in your graphic organizer. Do not write a thesis statement without first examining the question and then collecting and considering the evidence in a graphic organizer. While the thesis statement is, of course, your own opinion, it needs to be based on evidence. As an example, let's return to our essay question from the previous podcasts. Describe the responses of slaves and freed African Americans to slavery, and analyze how the institution of slavery changed between 1775 and 1830. After examining the question and collecting evidence, one student might come up with the following thesis statement. Slaves and freed African Americans did not like slavery, and slavery changed a lot between 1775 and 1830. Is there anything wrong with this thesis statement? Well, not exactly. The statement is true, but there's not a whole lot right with it either. First, had this student collected appropriate evidence, he would have seen that the responses of slaves and those of freedmen were different. The first part of his thesis statement lumps the two groups together. Moreover, his phrase, did not like slavery, is not a specific response, which is what the question requires the student to describe. Finally, the student has written that slavery changed a lot, but this information is conveyed in the question itself. The question requires the student to analyze how slavery changed. Therefore, the thesis statement should render an opinion on that point. Overall, this vague, weak thesis statement is setting the student up to receive a C, D, or F, depending on what follows the thesis. A B thesis to the question above might read, while slaves and freed African Americans resisted slavery in a variety of different ways, the institution itself spread throughout the South between 1775 and 1830. This more specific thesis, while clunky, does distinguish between the responses of slaves and those of freemen, but only in a vague way. It also begins to consider how slavery changed, though it ignores the fact that the North abolished slavery during this period and that the institution in the South grew more repressive as it spread westward. Poor note-taking, incomplete evidence collection, or a failure to thoroughly consider the whole question might have caused these oversights. Nevertheless, this student is on track to write a competent thesis to the question with a thesis like this. Now, while I don't expect any of you to write an A-level thesis in your first response papers, I will provide you with an A-level thesis to this question so that you can see the level of sophistication required for an A-level work in this course. An A-level thesis might read, while the North abolished slavery between 1775 and 1830, at the same time, slavery in the South spread and grew more repressive, which led slaves to resist bondage through a variety of violent and nonviolent means, and encouraged freed African Americans to fight for abolition through church, literary, and activist organizations. Certainly, inexperienced writers will have a tough time crafting a thesis like this, but with practice, you too can come close during this semester. For now, remember to take 15 or more minutes responding to any essay by writing a thesis statement based on the question and the evidence you've collected in your graphic organizer. Don't just think about the thesis either. Be sure to write one down on a piece of paper and, if necessary, write several versions to see which one worked best. Good luck, and see you in the next podcast.